Marcus Hale buttoned the cuff of his suit in his dimly lit apartment, the night stretching quietly around him. The silence was heavier than the laughter of any crowd he had ever been part of. In the mirror, he studied his reflection, a man who had learned to stand straight, even when life seemed intent on making the ground give way beneath him. The creases near his eyes hinted at sleepless nights and quiet battles. His tie, one he hadn't worn in years, felt stiff around his neck, a reminder of rituals he had long neglected. Tonight, he was not just dressing for a wedding. He was stepping into a hall of reminders, memories of loss, of moments he wished could have been different, and the responsibilities that weighed him down like invisible chains. Marcus had become a single father 5 years ago, after illness claimed his wife too early. Noah, his 6-year-old son, had become both his anchor and his greatest responsibility. Life had compressed into routines, early school drop-offs, late-night laundry, horrid dinners, and the steady hum of doing what had to be done. Weddings were moments he usually avoided. They reminded him of beginnings he could no longer claim, and of love he had lost. But this one was different. His younger cousin was getting married, a family milestone he promised to honor. He drove through familiar roads outside Columbus, Ohio, the quiet streets dotted with houses close enough to share shadows but distant enough to hold secrets. One hand gripped the steering wheel. The other held a folded note that Noah had slipped into his jacket pocket that morning. In childish handwriting, it reminded him to smile and to eat cake. It was a small gesture, a touchstone of normalcy and love amidst the heaviness of his adult world. Arriving at the venue, Marcus parked and observed couples stepping out of their cars, laughter trailing behind them like melodies he had forgotten. He straightened his jacket, ran a hand through his hair, and reminded himself that being alone didn't mean being empty. The ceremony hall glowed warmly, decorated with fresh flowers, the kind of beauty that slowed breaths and made hearts ache with quiet longing. Marcus chose a seat at the back, where he could observe without being observed. He clapped when others did, smiled politely, and kept his grief folded neatly inside, a companion no one else could see. As the vows concluded, a familiar ache settled in him. It wasn't envy. It was longing mixed with gratitude, a knot of feelings he had learned to carry. At the reception, he moved through conversations with distant relatives, nodding and smiling politely while carefully excusing himself to step outside for air. Outside, his phone buzzed. A picture of Noah asleep on the couch appeared, a thumb tucked under his chin, innocence and trust perfectly captured. Marcus smiled fully for the first time that evening. Across town, someone else noticed the night sky, the same moon illuminating her thoughts. Rachel Collins, his neighbor 2 doors down, had been observing him from a distance for months. She had watched the small ways he carried his responsibilities, the quiet dignity in everyday acts, and the determination he never asked anyone to acknowledge. Though Rachel had declined the wedding invitation under the pretense of paperwork, instinct nudged her to attend in spirit. Seeing Marcus leave his driveway earlier that evening, she felt a pull she could not ignore. Something about tonight whispered that moments like this were fleeting and rare, and she could no longer simply watch. Meanwhile, inside the reception, Marcus lingered near the edge of the dance floor, nursing a glass of water as joy swirled around him. He told himself this was enough, that witnessing happiness from afar was a privilege in itself. But the universe had a way of testing resolve. A voice cut through the music, not quietly, not politely, but with boldness and an undercurrent of hope. Heads turned. Marcus froze. Disbelief crossed his features as he recognized a woman standing at the entrance, Rachel, breathless, determined, and unplanned. She had arrived on instinct alone, ignoring careful preparation and cautious thinking. In that moment, the room seemed to pause. Music softened, conversations dwindled, and 2 lives, once parallel yet unseen by one another, were about to intersect in a way that neither could have scripted. The room felt heavier now, even with music and laughter flowing around them. Marcus's pulse had quickened when he saw Rachel, her presence cutting through the crowd like sunlight through clouds. She hadn't approached with rehearsed lines or polite small talk. Instead, she walked with steady determination, letting the truth of the moment do the work. Marcus, frozen for a second, felt a door creak open inside him that he had long thought sealed. Rachel stopped in front of him, and for the first time in months, he realized how much he had been seen without pretense. She didn't offer solutions or advice. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She simply acknowledged his existence with courage that left him speechless. It was startling, the way a single person could make someone feel both noticed and unburdened, as if the weight of responsibility could momentarily be set aside without judgment. Marcus cleared his throat, forcing words where emotions crowded too heavily. "I wasn't expecting anyone tonight." Rachel smiled softly, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "I know. Neither was I." The night air beckoned, and they stepped outside, not fleeing the celebration, but to carve a quiet corner for conversation. Stars pierced the dark sky, sharp and cold, yet somehow comforting. They walked side by side, neither speaking at first, simply breathing in the cool air, letting the tension dissolve slowly. The quiet allowed Marcus to gather his thoughts, to confront the complexity of being both a father and a man seeking moments of connection he had long denied himself. "I carry a lot," Marcus admitted finally, his voice low. "Noah, my world, my every decision, it all weighs on me." Rachel nodded knowingly. "I've built walls too," she said, "brick by brick. I thought they were protecting me, but I realized sometimes they just kept me from being seen." There was a pause, filled with understanding neither had spoken aloud. Marcus felt the unusual relief of being acknowledged, not for what he had lost, but for the person he was trying to become. Here, outside the noise and expectations of the reception hall, he could speak honestly without fear of pity or judgment. Over the next few minutes, they shared fragments of their lives, Marcus recounting small victories and silent defeats, Rachel revealing moments of quiet observation and empathy. Marcus spoke of Noah's bedtime rituals, of the picture the babysitter had sent, and of the small joys he clung to amidst the challenges of single parenthood. Rachel spoke of the neighborhood, the people she worked with as a school counselor, and the simple acts of noticing that often go unseen. As they talked, Marcus realized that courage could arrive in unexpected forms. Not as a grand gesture, not as an announcement to the world, but as one person daring to step forward and be fully present. Rachel's presence was a mirror reflecting possibilities he had forgotten existed. Inside, the wedding continued, the laughter and dancing almost distant now, as if the entire event had shrunk around their shared space. Marcus felt the tug of his responsibilities, but also the thrill of being human again. He laughed at small stories Rachel told, genuine and unrestrained, a sound that reminded him he could still find joy even while carrying grief. Over the following weeks, Rachel became more than a passing figure in his life. She didn't replace what he had lost. She became a companion in building what he was striving to create. Homework help, cheering at soccer games, shared dinners, each moment stitched carefully into the fabric of his life, offering companionship without pressure. They faced awkward moments, hesitations, and fears, but a thread of honesty guided them forward. Healing wasn't linear. It was a mosaic of brave choices, stitched together by trust, patience, and the quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity. Marcus watched Noah in those moments, perceptive as children are, sensing shifts in the energy around him. Laughter returned to their home, not forced, but as a natural rhythm that grew from safety and care. Marcus began to recognize joy without hesitation, and Rachel allowed herself to hope for the future in ways she hadn't imagined before. The world, Marcus realized, didn't always announce miracles. Sometimes they arrived quietly, in a presence, in words spoken without pretense, in someone seeing you fully without expectation. That night outside the reception had been the first of many such moments, a turning point that began to shift the trajectory of his life, showing him that even amidst grief, connection, and courage could thrive. And in the quiet hours before sleep, Marcus would reflect on the bravery it took, not to walk into a wedding alone, not to shoulder responsibility, but to allow someone to meet you halfway, to recognize the person you were striving to become, and to remind you that humanity often arrives in simple, unexpected acts of presence. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet courage of that night continued to ripple through Marcus's life. Rachel didn't arrive with grand gestures or dramatic promises. She arrived steadily, consistently, weaving herself into the rhythm of Marcus and Noah's days. Homework sessions, soccer practices, weekend errands, and shared dinners became ordinary miracles. The extraordinary, Marcus realized, often came in the ordinary moments where trust and humanity quietly grew. Noah, perceptive as any child, noticed a shift before anyone spoke of it. He observed his father smile without hesitation, saw Rachel cheering at his games without expectation, and felt the warmth of a home slowly regaining laughter. It wasn't a perfect picture. There were awkward silences, small disagreements, and moments when the past crept back like an unwelcome shadow. But each time, Marcus and Rachel face it honestly, choosing patience over fear, conversation over avoidance. Healing, they learned, was not linear. It was a series of small, brave moments stitched together by care and understanding. One evening, after putting Noah to bed, Marcus sat quietly in the living room, reflecting. He held a cup of coffee, letting the steam rise and settle, as if mirroring the slow unwrapping of his own life. The bravery Rachel had shown that night at the wedding, the bold, unplanned shout, the decision to step forward without guarantee, had changed him profoundly. It reminded him that courage doesn't always rule. Sometimes it whispers in gestures, in attention, in the simple act of being present. Marcus looked back on that wedding and the room full of couples, laughter, and life he had once envied. Now, he understood. Being alone at a wedding didn't define him. Being responsible for his son didn't limit his ability to experience joy. Humanity, he realized, often arrives through others who see you fully, even when you forget to see yourself. Rachel's presence, patient and authentic, had become that reminder. Together, they navigated life carefully, building routines that respected Noah's needs while allowing space for connection and growth. Rachel learned how to support, not replace. Marcus learned how to let himself be supported. The household, once dominated by responsibility and quiet struggle, now hummed with laughter, debate, and the occasional chaos of life lived fully. It was imperfect, real, and filled with moments that carried weight far beyond their appearance. The anniversary of the wedding arrived, and Marcus and Rachel returned to the same hall, not as strangers or bystanders, but as participants who understood the power of presence. Marcus squeezed Rachel's hand, grateful not just for the years that had passed, but for the courage that had first entered his life that night. He realized that the difference between isolation and connection often came down to a single brave step, one moment of acknowledgement that could change everything. Noah, too, felt the subtle changes. He laughed louder, asked questions freely, and began to trust the rhythms of his world, sensing that the adults around him were showing up fully. Marcus noticed that when his son smiled without reservation, the weight he had carried alone for years felt lighter. And in those quiet exchanges, Marcus learned that human kindness, when practiced without expectation, could heal wounds that seemed permanent. Looking back, Marcus knew that life had not erased pain. It hadn't erased the grief of losing his wife, nor the lonely nights of raising a child alone. But it had added something more powerful: connection, understanding, and the knowledge that courage and kindness often arrive when we least expect them. Rachel had not solved his struggles, and he had not erased his, but together they had built a space where humanity could flourish, quietly, persistently, beautifully. That night, Marcus tucked Noah into bed, his son steady breathing a rhythm of life renewed. He walked to the porch, looking at the stars with a heart no longer burdened entirely by loss. Courage had come in the form of a neighbor, a friend, a witness to his life. Humanity had arrived in the simplest form: presence, acknowledgement, and quiet consistency. He understood now that life doesn't always hand you miracles loudly. Sometimes they enter softly, reminding you to look up, to breathe, to hope. And Marcus, finally, allowed himself to hope, not for perfection, but for presence, for moments of kindness that could reshape lives, for the quiet courage that starts with one person daring to be seen.